Okay, so the recording is going again, and we wish everyone a very good morning. My name's Alexander. I'm joined by Nicholas. We're both consultants based in Singapore. We're going to talk about Scopus, and in particular, the content that's in Scopus, which content is included, how can you find what's relevant to you, and so forth. Today's session is being recorded, so tomorrow you receive a link with so you can download the slides and the recording of today's webinar. As always, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box. We'll try to answer them along the way or otherwise at the end. Today is the third webinar as part of a webinar series that's dedicated to the Malaysia Scopus Consortium. So today is session 3, focused on Scopus content. If you want to access the recordings to the previous webinars, you can use the QR codes. And again, we will provide you these slides so that you have these QR codes by tomorrow. The remaining sessions will be September 20th, focused on analytical features in Scopus. October 24th, focused on author profiles, preprints and topics. And November 7th, focused on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I was lucky enough to be moving into a new role at Elsevier. So Nicholas will be taking the lead on the remaining webinars, but I'm still at Elsevier. I'm still in Singapore, so I'll probably still see everyone around. Just FYI.
Congratulations on the new role, though, Sander.
Thanks.
You've seen you around.
So today's agenda is, as always, we start at the beginning with an introduction. We're going to look at Scopus. How does it select and curate content? So I think one of the important things about Scopus is that it is selective in which content is included, and it does curate the content to make sure that any journal that isn't performing will be removed. So with that in mind, we'll look at how can you, as a student, a researcher, librarian, admin, executive, whoever you are, find the right journal, conference, or book in Scopus, or how can you understand the status of a journal, whether it's an active journal in Scopus or whether perhaps it's an inactive journal. We'll explain what that means if you're not sure. We're also going to look at predatory publishing. This is a big topic, and it's an important topic, especially for Malaysia, where a lot of, let's say, people pretending to be genuine journals are attracting students, researchers to publish in their journal, but they may not be quite what it seems, hence the term predatory publishing. They are preying on your need to publish as a way to make money. So we're going to look at what that is, what some of the warning signs are, and how you can use Scopus in the best way to ensure that you don't accidentally publish in a predatory journal. Again, anywhere along the way, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box. Probably the chat is disabled. Let me see if I can enable it. I have enabled the chat so that you can use that, but preferred if you ask your questions in the Q&A box. We will be providing certificates today, and we'll explain how to get your certificate at the very end. So that makes sense. So hang in there. If you want a certificate, you can certainly get one, and we'll explain how at the end. Any comments from you, Nick?
No, let's get started.
All right.
Only thing I would say is just please feel free to type in any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we'll be very happy to tackle them along the way. Yeah, keep your questions coming in.
So the introduction to Scopus and Scopus content. Just a reminder, Scopus is a very comprehensive, curated database of peer-reviewed literature. So it's peer-reviewed scientific content, journals, conferences, and books from 7,000 publishers, all in one database. And that allows you to do a lot of different things, which we've covered in previous webinars. So I won't go over all the use cases, but we've got profiles for every author, profiles for many institutions, and so forth. By now, Scopus has over 90 million records. So again, record would be an article. Almost 100,000 institutional profiles. So if you want to look at the University Malaya or UKM or, Multimedia University, whichever one it is, you can see the profile. Every researcher has a profile. We've got different data sources for Scopus, of course, the 7,000 publishers, but we also have things like PlumX metrics and some funding data, so you can see which funding body provided the money for research that's resulted in a particular paper. This is stuff that we focused on in other webinars, so I won't kind of go on a tangent and try to cover that. I think an important point about Scopus is that the data is connected. So every paper is connected to the people who have written the paper, and also to the institutions that the people are affiliated to the co-authors. So you can link from seeing a paper to going to the author to see all their papers, to see other papers and maybe see papers published by their co-authors. So it's an easy navigation because you can link starting from papers, going to authors, to co-authors, or maybe starting with an author, going to papers, and so forth. Everything's connected. That is increasingly common in large data sources. So I won't stick with that too much. I think some of the key use cases, progressing research. So teaching people, having all of the information that you need to teach and to learn, having all the information that you need to grow in your career, from maybe a student to a PhD to a postdoc and so forth. Researchers need access to peer-reviewed literature to understand where the edge of their field is and to base as a foundation for their own work, right? So all of that helps researchers to thrive and to do research faster and benefiting from all of the most, relevant findings. This used to take a lot of time. You had to go to a library, and I had, back in the Stone Age when I was young, you had to go to the library and find the journal and get it, the paper journal, bring it to the printer, bring it to the photocopy machine, like photocopy the right article. So it's all quite a lot more easy now. But Scopus is not only for finding individual papers and supporting the researcher workflow, but also for evaluation. So for understanding the relative performance of a journal, a person, an institution, a country, so forth. So understanding research performance in terms of output and impact. Scopus does also help with that. And that helps people in a lot of different positions, anywhere from students, researchers, librarians, editors, heads of departments, administrative, admin in research services, we call it here, but it's basically admins, as well as executives, policymakers. Helps them do a lot of things related to their roles in a way that's easier and faster than it would be if you had to do it manually. The content, again, the content that's in Scopus is important. Scopus is a curated database. We select content. About 11% of the titles are from Elsevier. So that's our company, right? We're from Elsevier. Only about 40% of the content comes from the big publishers. 60% of the content comes from could be university press or a journal that's just part of a university or independent. So we don't select content based on the publisher. We select content based on the merit of the particular journal. At a journal level, we look, does the journal meet the criteria to be in Scopus? The result is that we include content that's coming from 105 different countries. It's actually in 45 different languages. So the content that's in Scopus, the full text does not need to be in English. The abstract and title needs to be in English. And we cover all of the major subject areas, journals, conferences, and books. Conferences are focused mainly on engineering and computer sciences, while books are focused more on social sciences, arts, and humanities. Journals are pretty good coverage across the major subject areas, including social sciences and humanities. I think for the students that are here that are not familiar with Scopus, Scopus does not include the full text. So Scopus includes the metadata of the article so that you can find the article, understand the relative quality of the article, who's written it, which journal it's in, and so forth. You should be able to link from Scopus to the publisher webpage to get access to the full text. So it can help you to find the full text, but it does not, the full text is not itself included in Scopus. Anything to add on that?
No, I think you covered pretty much. Something which I wanted to cover with the previous slide, though, was that I want to caveat very clearly that not all Elsevier journals are indexed within Scopus, because of a couple of slides forward that Sander will walk you through, and he'll walk you through how the methods of indexing a journal is. Elsevier journals would have to go through the same process of quality standards before they can be indexed in Scopus. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that not all journals are included within Scopus. They have to be very qualitatively and rigorously checked and fulfill the criteria before they are indexed in it. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. So that leads us to, how does this process work? So how does Scopus curate content? Well, a very important aspect is the CSAB. So this is the Scopus Content Selection Advisory Board, which are an independent board of prominent researchers. Each one is a chair in a different field. So we have 17 subject chairs. Each one is a prominent researcher coming from they're coming from countries all around the world. Each one is responsible for making the end decision of whether a particular journal is indexed in Scopus or not. So if a journal related to medical field is submitted to Scopus, it would be the chair for medicine will be the one who makes the end decision, right? So it's always one of these individuals that makes the decision. They don't work for Elsevier. We don't pay them a salary. They are independent and have the mandate to make the choice based purely on the quality and whether the journal objectively meets the criteria to be in Scopus, so that they don't have this commercial bias, right? So that we can't tell them what to do. And they've been doing this for quite a while, but they do it based on quite transparent criteria. So it's not like they just say, oh, I like this one. It's not an emotional decision. It's one that's grounded in quite transparent selection criteria, which we will cover today. Our mandate at Scopus is at the journal level. It's not at the individual article level. So I've had questions asked to me is how does Scopus decide if a particular article is accepted into Scopus? And the answer is we don't. So we don't select articles, we select journals. Journals should have responsible and effective peer review workflow, right? So the peer review is what determines whether a paper gets published in a journal or not. Scopus selects journals based on that we believe that they have a robust peer review process in place, and some other factors that we'll discuss later. But basically, if a journal is selected to be in Scopus, all of the papers that are published in the journal will be included in Scopus. So again, we select at the journal level. Once it's included in Scopus, we don't interfere with editorial autonomy of the journal. However, if the journal is publishing papers or is showing predatory practices or very low quality papers, we can de-index the entire journal, which would mean we would stop indexing the journal. But again, that decision is also at a journal level, not at the level of the individual paper. So what criteria do we use? Well, first of all, there's a minimum criteria that's needed, which is that all journals should be peer reviewed. Full text can be in any language, but the abstracts must be in English. It must be a regular publication. So it must be a regular serial title that has had an ISSN for 2 years. We have a strong preference for journals that use Roman script references, because the references need to be linked to the papers which they're citing to create the citation links in Scopus. There must be a strong publications ethics statement on the website of the journal. Assuming that all of those are met, the journal will be evaluated based on 5 buckets and 14 criteria. So the first focus is on the policy of the journal. So this is looking at the aims and scope of the journal, looking at the editorial board of the journal and how diverse it is. Quality of the content. So that's looking at the actual content that the journal is publishing. How well does it match the aims and scope? What's the quality of the papers, of the abstracts? Is it really contributing to the field? Is it internationally relevant is it relevant to people that are using Scopus, right? Looking at the standing of the journal. So that's looking at are the papers published in the journal already being cited, right? So are they impactful papers? And the editorial board, are they prominent researchers? So are they qualified? The people who are managing the journal, are they qualified to do that? Looking at regularity, is the journal publishing a set schedule and meeting that schedule without delay? That's very important, that a journal that publishes twice a year publishes twice a year. If it publishes 3 times a year, that publishes 3 times a year. And it's important that the content is available online. So there must be a website. The website can be dual language or English, but it must have an option for English. The content must be available there. It can be freely available, open access, or it can be subscription model, as long as it's somewhere available in the digital domain. So I don't think that most of the people here, unless you're a journal editor, you don't need to worry about this too much. It's just trying to demonstrate that there is quite a transparent and robust set of criteria that are used to determine whether a journal is indexed in Scopus or not. And that the people who interpret that, it's not me, it's not Nicholas, it's an independent board of prominent researchers that have been doing that. And this process is what really sets Scopus apart from Google Scholar or any database that just takes everything that they can get and put it into a database. We are comprehensive, but we don't take everything. We're quite selective in what's in Scopus. Anything to add on?
No, I think this illustrates very clearly just what are the procedures that you probably want to know, and what we prioritize when we're selecting journals to be indexed within Scopus. So I think this 14 selection criteria will give you a much clearer understanding and idea for this level of standards that we are looking at.
So the way that looks in reality is that roughly in any given year, we get about 3,500 submissions to Scopus. So that's 3,500 journals that submit and say, we want to be in Scopus. Funnily, I don't know how funny it is, but interestingly, only 39% of those journals meet the minimum criteria, right? So you can see that a lot of journals maybe submit to Scopus without checking if they meet the minimum criteria. Of the ones that meet the minimum criteria, about 46% are selected, so a little bit less than half. So of the 3,500 journals that want to be in Scopus in a given year, we accept maybe 630, roughly speaking. So we're incredibly selective. We also reevaluate all of the content that's in Scopus. So there's different ways of checking if the existing journals in Scopus still meet the criteria. If they don't, we will remove them. We'll de-index them from Scopus, which means we stop indexing them with a forward flow. We leave the older content in Scopus, but it means that from a certain cutoff point, we stop indexing newer content for those journals. If you look at the acceptance and rejection rates, they differ for various countries. For Malaysia, in this period, which is covering on 2011 to 2019, we see that 57 journals were accepted and 106 journals were rejected. So the rejections are almost twice as much as the accepted journals. While for Switzerland, you see that the percentage of accepted journals is much higher. We definitely focus on helping Malaysian journals, Indonesian journals, Thai journals, basically journals in regions like Southeast Asia. We really want to get more journals from Southeast Asia in Scopus, but we can't lower the standard, right? So the standard needs to stay high. So we work with journals to help them to understand these criteria, help them to professionalize their workflow, raise the impact of the journal, and so forth. That's a work in progress. I think we do have near 100 Malaysian journals in Scopus, maybe around the same level for Indonesia, about 70 Thai journals in Scopus, which will, I believe that will increase over the years. The reevaluation process, so I mentioned that the existing journals that are in Scopus, we monitor them based on certain criteria. We monitor the performance of those journals. We flag certain journals which we think maybe there's a problem. We're not sure, but we think there might be a problem with the quality of the journal. And those flagged journals go back to the same independent board, the CSAB, and they will holistically reevaluate the journal and decide whether it stays in Scopus or whether it gets delisted, right? Those 4 criteria that we use to flag journals are kind of go through. I think people are probably thinking, do I really have to know this? You don't necessarily need to know this. It's an educational thing for us to show how much trouble we put into selecting and curating the database. So the first one is really based from feedback from people. And it's called publication concerns. And it's like if you or a librarian or someone sees a journal in Scopus, but has good reason to believe that that journal has bad publication ethics behavior, right? So if said, I really think that this journal is not doing a proper peer review, I believe that they accept any paper that, if the author pays the publication fee, that they'll publish any paper. They're not doing a peer review, for example, right? You send that to Nicholas. Nicholas is going to say, do you have evidence? And you say, well, actually I do, because they've been emailing me every week promising that if I pay the fee, 100% chance that my paper will be accepted, right? So you send those emails to Nicholas. He's going to share them with the relevant people at the Scopus team. That journal will be flagged. It means at that moment, we can't make a decision, right? It needs to go back to the CSAB. They need to review everything and they will make a decision, but that journal has been flagged. The second one is called underperforming. This is based on metrics such as how often a journal has been cited, what's the level of self-citations, and it identifies journals which are underperforming compared to other journals in the same field. And it flags those for reevaluation. Again, we don't at that point make any decision. It's just showing, objectively speaking, these journals are performing much worse than other journals in the same field. The third one we call outlier performance, and it's a machine learning tool that we call Radar. And it looks at strange changes in behavior. So, for example, if 80% of the citations from the journal come from 4 people, or if the journal goes from publishing 80 papers per year to publishing 1,200 papers 1 year later. And that's a huge difference, right? So changes of behavior that may suggest that something is happening there that we need to look at. So that's called outlier performance. The journals will also be flagged. The last one is called continuous curation. This is for new journals that were just accepted into Scopus. Some of them are told you're accepted, but in 2 years, we're going to reevaluate you because we believe you need to work on, a couple of things. Maybe you need to improve your citation impact, stuff like that. Based on those 4 categories, right? We've reevaluated 1,079 journals. The biggest bucket is publication concerns. So that would include predatory publishing or any other ethical concern, where of the 482 flagged journals, we discontinued 337, but 145, the CSAB reevaluated and decided that they should remain in Scopus. For performance, it was 306 journals that were flagged. 147 were discontinued, 159 stayed in Scopus. So it's 52% were discontinued. Does that number add up? No, it doesn't, right? 52%, 147 discontinued is not 52%, but never mind. I didn't make the slide. That's my defense. Outlier performance is 147 journals were flagged, 83 were discontinued, 64 stayed in Scopus. And for continuous curation, 108 journals, 23 were discontinued, 85 stayed in Scopus. So if we look just at last year, 2022, 64 journals were reevaluated, and 47 of them were discontinued. So that's actually quite high. 73% of the flagged journals last year were discontinued. Okay, so it's important for us to reevaluate and remove any content that's not meeting the standards anymore. But that means that for you as a researcher, it's super important to keep in mind that the status of a journal in Scopus can change, and it's super important for you to know how to determine the latest status of a journal, whether it's actively indexed in Scopus or whether it might be discontinued. It's something we'll talk about a little bit more. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. Nicholas can share any thoughts that he has.
So actually, there was a question pertaining to underperforming journals and the criteria which constitutes that. But I believe you have covered that in the previous slides as well, when you covered about the citation counts, etc. So I think that question has been answered. I would say if you have any questions, do put them into the question box and we will take it as it comes. But Sander, from my side, I've actually a question that came to my mind. So I think it would be fair to say over the past couple of years, due to COVID, the publication counts and the citation counts of journals, we have definitely observed an increase in terms of counts. But moving forward, as it progresses away from the COVID period, and as research on COVID tapers, this would obviously impact the citation counts as well. But I assume, hopefully correctly, that this will not constitute as underperformance as well. Would that be right?
No, I think that those type of trends are going to be taken into consideration and they would be valid across the board. But yeah, it's a good point. I don't believe that that trend will cause a journal to be discontinued. I think that the citation level will be interpreted in context of that type of a trend as well. But it's a good thing to keep in mind. I mentioned it's important to know where to see which journal is currently active versus inactive in Scopus. That can be done on our Scopus website as well as the Elsevier has some websites which I find a little bit difficult to navigate, but the easiest place to go is really Scopus itself. So if you're in Scopus on the landing page, you go to sources, right? Sources, and here you can download Scopus source list. You need to have created a username, right? So as long as you're within the IP of your university, right? So Scopus is a subscription model. The Ministry of Higher Education pays for the 20 public universities to have Scopus. So all of the public universities in Malaysia have Scopus within your IP range. You can easily create a username that allows you to do all kinds of cool things like save searches and set up alerts and so forth, but also you need to do that to get the source list. To download the source list, you just go here and select download Scopus source titles list. It is a big file. I think it's about 20 megabytes or something. So it can take a bit of time to download. It's 27.3 megabytes. So I'm going to open that. There we go. And I'm going to change the share. How do I do that? New share. All right. So I doubt that your eyes are so good that you could read this. So you can see there are a number of tabs, right? So on the bottom, you can see Scopus sources May 2023 accepted titles. So the second tab are newly accepted titles. The third tab are discontinued titles. I think the first tab is very important because you can see that this particular column, column E, you can see if a journal is active or inactive. Inactive does not mean a journal was removed from Scopus. It could mean that the journal stopped publishing. Journals are like many people, they retire. They can retire, you know, like companies, they stop existing. A journal might cease operations at some point and become inactive. So it might not have anything to do with quality, but you should be able to see that the years that are covered in Scopus, and they might be odd years. So that's indicated here. The red ones are journals that were discontinued because of quality concerns based on that process that we talked about. So you can see that this journal here, Academic Journal of Cancer Research, is inactive and that it was discontinued by Scopus. So yeah, the discontinued ones are red. And if you go to tab number 3, and I'll make this a bit bigger, you can see all of the discontinued titles. The title, the ISSN, the publisher, the reason for discontinuation. So remember the 4 categories that I outlined a little bit earlier. You can see which one of the 4 categories is the basis for it being discontinued. And very importantly, you can see the last year, volume, issue, and page range that is included in Scopus. So if you remember, with discontinuation, we don't remove all of the papers of the journal. We stop the forward indexing of it. So we take a point and we say, from now on, we don't index the journal anymore, but we leave the older content in Scopus. So where is that cutoff point? You can see exactly where that cutoff point is, right? This list is updated once a month. This list is the only authoritative place to see what journals are in Scopus, what's been discontinued in Scopus, understand the status of a journal. So that's super important for researchers because you don't want to publish in a journal that just got discontinued, thinking that your paper is going to end up in Scopus, and then it turns out, oh, the journal is not indexed in Scopus anymore. This would be the place where you find that out. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions or comments.
We do have one question, and someone has pointed out if they need fast publications, and if some Scopus journals accept their article, how are they able to validate whether or not it's genuine and not predatory?
Good question. We're going to talk about predatory publishing in the next kind of section. I think promises of fast peer review are one of the warning signs, so you probably want to be a little bit careful. I think you need to look holistically at whether a journal shows behavior that would be considered predatory. If a journal has the right editorial board and the right mechanisms in place, and they manage to be efficient in doing their peer review so that it's done relatively quickly, but it is being done in a ethically correct and sound manner, then it's not a problem in and of itself if there are no other signs of wrongful behavior. So it's something that's a little bit tricky to answer just on the face of it, saying, should I worry? I think we should be a little bit worried in terms of journals that are a little bit too eager to publish us and make promises like, oh, we can peer review very quickly. And I think any journal that makes a guarantee that you can get into the journal, you know, that's a promise that they should never be able to make. Journals should be selective. If they are selective, but they're efficient, they say, well, we have a great pool of reviewers and we're efficient in that process, so we do this quickly, then that's not necessarily a problem, right? So I think that's something to look into, but we'll discuss that a bit more in the next section. Yeah, so this title list is really important. It's updated once a month, and you can see exactly what's been discontinued, as well as which journals are active and inactive, and the coverage years in Scopus. I'm gonna try to go back to, there we are. So again, that was in sources. That's up here. And just go here, download title list. You have to have created a login. Pretty easy. So we do on the source browse page. So every journal has a page that summarizes the journal. If it's discontinued, it should say discontinued here. I would strongly recommend to use the Excel sheet. Right, if you're going to publish in a journal and you're not sure of the status, please check the Excel sheet. Don't rely too much on this page because it can take a bit of time to be updated. Finding the right journal. So I'm going to hand over to Nicholas. He's our expert journal finder at Elsevier.
Thanks a lot for that, Sander. Next slide, please.
Oh, you're gonna have to freestyle it. We don't have slides, so just gonna have to talk about you know, some of the, I think, you know,
Yeah,
some tips on.
I don't think it should be an issue. Give me a quick second.
Sure.
So I think if you go on to the next slide, interesting. Okay. So I think one of the key things that we probably have identified pertaining to predatory publishing is that we know that predatory journals are actually on the rise, and there has been an escalation in terms of predatory journals. But one of the challenges I think that we are facing, I think if you go to the next slide, there should be some content. Yeah. So one of the key things I think that people are not exactly familiar about is how do you define predatory journals, right? And I think one of the key studies have identified that up to 420,000 articles in predatory journals were published between 2010 to 2014, and this number has been increasing. So this is actually a very salient point of concern for everyone with regard in scholarly publishing itself. Next slide, please.
And I think interesting here is that it shows that if you look at the authors that are publishing in predatory journals, 75% of them come either from Asia or Africa. And it shows that the predatory journals are focusing more on regions like Asia. So that's why I said I think it's particularly relevant for Malaysia, because we know that a lot of predatory journals are focusing on Malaysian researchers.
So it started approximately back in 2010, and I think some of you who are familiar with it would often be asking about Beall's list. So this was coined by Jeffrey Beall back in 2010, and it was an unofficial reviewer in terms of what constitutes as predatory publishing or otherwise. He used to curate this list on a website called beallslist.net, and his definition was that of journals that prey on unsuspecting and young scholars who submit their manuscript itself for money from the scholars. And there was a lot of criticism from Jeffrey Beall. The website was closed on the 17th of January 2017. But one of the key things that I think that Sana and I would agree is that there is no official white list or blacklist pertaining to predatory publishing. Earlier, we ran you through on the selection criteria for Scopus for journals. So you're aware of the 14 quantitative and qualitative criteria. And this is actually what we used to very, very rigorously determine which journals are of excellent standards. Scopus does not index on any predatory journals as far as we are aware of. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so I think a good point here is that Jeffrey Beall did a great job in raising this topic of predatory publishing, but that his method for identifying journals wasn't holistic. He was doing it based on the publisher, and he didn't have transparent criteria. There were differences in opinion. And so there's a lot of criticism on Jeffrey Beall, and he closed Beall's list in 2017. So since then, there became more of a need to align on what is predatory publishing and how do we determine if a particular journal is predatory or not. So Beall started this, but also his method arguably was too simplistic. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Sure. I think some of the challenges that people face when it comes to predatory publishing is that there are a lot of issues that really drive it, right? And I think most of us are aware when it comes to the publish and perish is a real problem. For most academics, the career progression depends on the research paper that you all have to publish. So there is a real demand for you to have to publish. When it comes to technology these days, it's very easy for anyone to just set up a website to spam thousands of potential authors and for them to receive payments easier than ever before. For people who are not aware, they would not have the experience to know how the online environment is like, because you'll be working online without the access to knowledge or the expertise or the subject area knowledge and domain expertise to distinguish what are bogus impact factors, etc., and otherwise. And I think this is especially true within our region. And as some of you would have faced, there is a very big exploitation with regards to the Go open access model, whether the pay to publish model is actually misused. I think one of the key things that we face is that because predatory publishers know that there is a demand for you to publish, they will send out bogus emails to everyone where they will solicit your publications to be published within their journals. They will promise you that, hey, you can publish this in a very short period of time. Or they'll say, hey, if you choose to pay a fee, we can guarantee that your article will be published within a week. But I think it's very important to establish a very key fact that when it comes to Go open access model, the article needs to be accepted by the journal before they'll ask you to pay an article processing charge. So the timing of the fee is very important. Predatory journals themselves will collect the APC fee, and then they'll promise that your article will be accepted. So you need to be very careful in understanding when the timing of the fee is as well. To further clarify, for those of you who may not be aware or who are able to distinguish the difference between a Go Open Access journal model and a conventional journal model. In a conventional model, journals would generate revenue by selling them to libraries or to readers on a subscription basis. When it comes to Go Open Access, this involves publishers charging an upfront author fee to cover the costs and then making the papers available online for free. So some very established open access publishers will include Elsevier, PLOS, Biomed Central, Wiley, Springer, etc. Back to you, Sander.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that the fact that we're all online with the internet makes it easier for people to find us and offer us stuff, right? Anyone can build a website and so forth. So, and open access. So asking money to publish has become a norm for, open access has become quite popular. So it's not as shocking today as it was 20 years ago if a journal says you need to pay me money to publish in my journal, right? We don't think that that's odd because you say, oh, it's an open access journal. That's just a new way of a new model of publishing. I think let's just do this together, Nicholas. So I think that, again, the definition of predatory publishing was unclear. And a group of researchers has got together in 2019 to come up with a consensus definition. And that definition reads, predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship, are characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, and or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. So a key part of his statement is that they are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship. So what does that mean? They're people that prioritize what they get out of it, money, over the responsibility of, doing a proper peer review and publishing high quality content that helps develop bodies of knowledge, right? So these people don't necessarily care too much about research. They're trying to use the context to make money for themselves. And for all of the reasons that we covered in the previous slide, that's just become a lot easier to do with internet. And that's what predatory publishing is people that prey on the fact that people need to publish papers. We have a quote here from our Professor Georg Rudinger-Sack, who is the chair of the CSAB. He was just in Singapore maybe about 6 weeks ago. And he says whether a journal is predatory or not is not a binary decision. There's a broad spectrum of predatory behaviors. To assess whether a journal should be considered predatory, a number of parameters need to be considered, often in combination. And if I go to the chat, Najib Nasir said the Ministry of Higher Education Malaysia has prohibited using government funds to publish in 3 international publishers, namely Hindawi, Frontiers, and MDPI. The journals under these publishers are considered as predatory journals. For your information and attention, many thanks. So this again highlights the complexity in determining whether a particular journal is predatory or not. So Elsevier bases its decision looking at individual journals, not at publishers. So we don't look at a publisher and say all of the journals that are under this publisher are predatory because we find one of them to be predatory. There have been a lot of discussion about Hindawi, Frontiers, and MDPI because of the volumes of papers that they're publishing are high, and they're charging money for that. And especially MDPI, there was, I think, a website was started, and there was an authority who would not identify themselves. They said, we are We are researchers who are taking it upon us to point out that MDPI are predatory, but they would not identify who they are. So we have no way of knowing who the people are. We've reviewed MDPI journals, and a lot of them we think are okay, and we're evaluating them at the individual journal level. And certainly the ones that we've reviewed made it into Scopus based on all of the criteria that we've reviewed in the previous slides. So again, Scopus selects journals at individual level, looking at each title and seeing if it meets the criteria and ensuring that there are no problematic science. If you read the reasons why MDPI, and I believe it's similar for Frontiers, why there were people suggesting that there are problems with these publishers, and all of the journals published by these publishers, I believe has to do with the volume of papers that are being published. That's a business model, is to have a high volume. The volume is not necessarily a problem if the peer review process is being done in a responsible way, and the resulting papers that are being accepted are good research papers, right? They represent responsible research that was done. So there's a lot of debate about this, and different people, different groups of people may come to a different conclusion for the same journal. Elsevier, Scopus does not look at a publisher level. So we don't say everything that MDPI has must be predatory. We're going to throw all of it out of Scopus. We think that would be incredibly unfair, given that certainly a number of the journals there do meet the criteria and are publishing some articles that are representing responsible research. So again, if your ministry has said you cannot do it with our funds, okay, that's a rule, means you received money, you cannot publish in these journals. The way that we do it in Scopus is a little bit different. So these are caveats you need to understand. It's not an easy or simple topic to cover, and there are differences in opinion. Tingyi asked, do you mean that bealslist.net is not a reliable check for predatory journals? Yes, correct. We do not believe it's reliable. It hasn't been updated since 2017. So that would make it outdated at the very least. How can I obtain a video recording for this seminar? We will send you a link. So Zoom will send you a link automatically tomorrow. With one of the links will be to the slides that we're presenting. The other one will be to the recording. I think Nicholas has already answered that, sorry. Any other outstanding questions?
There is one that came through. Some of the publishers were placed under the watch list by some authorities, and some of the journals of the publishers are ranked Q1 and Q2 by Scopus and Web of Science. So they want to know how this case is not conflicting.
Yeah, so I think I explained it that we don't look at the publisher. So yes, there are some groups which have said that we believe that these publishers should be watched. And we believe that you need to look at the individual journal level. A publisher might cover like 80, 90, or 100 journals. And we need to look at the journal, each individual journal, and look at the editorial board, look at the aims and scope of the journal, look at the peer review that's in place, look at the resulting papers. Do the papers match the aims and scope? Are they papers that represent responsible research where the findings are relevant to an international audience? All of those things, right? We believe strongly that must be done at the individual journal level and not at the level of a publisher, where you assume that all of the journals published by a particular publisher, just because some authority who sometimes they don't even know how to explain in great detail how they came to the conclusion. We don't believe that should be done at the publisher level, but at the journal level. The question is here, so if the journals are Scopus Index, that means they are good journals. When the fees are high and the frequency of articles published is high, people commonly assume they are not good journals and predatory. However, if it is Scopus Index, the quality should not be questioned, definitely not predatory. It means that at this point, we don't have reason to de-index the journal. We don't see a fundamental problem. We don't see that it doesn't meet our criteria. But should there be evidence that comes to light in future that a particular journal doesn't meet the criteria, or that it is indiscriminately publishing any paper, for example, it can still be de-indexed. So if you have strong evidence or strong reason to doubt that a journal is what it's saying that it is, even if it's in Scopus, then you should make the decision not to publish it in. We do our best job. So we do the best job possible to select journals that meet our criteria and that are not predatory. We do the best job possible of identifying journals that we have indexed that have become predatory and removing those. But that takes time, right? So it is possible that a journal that is in Scopus today can be removed next month because we find evidence of predatory practices, right? So that means that just because a journal is in Scopus today is not 100% guarantee that this journal is not going to have problems and that it's not going to be removed. So again, every researcher must do kind of due diligence. We must resist the temptation to publish in the journal that's easiest for us to publish. So a journal that is eager, that high volumes, quick process, especially if they're making guarantees, even if they're in Scopus, even if they're in Web of Science. If the warning signs are there, I would say don't do it. There's always a risk. On our end, we do our best to be speedy in the reevaluation, but it does take time. So from the point that a journal becomes predatory to the point that we discover that or remove that, there's always a lag of time, right? So you want to make sure that you don't accidentally publish in that journal during that time. And certainly, you know that if a lot of people are talking about MDPI and about Hindawi, probably we're going to focus more on evaluating those individual journals. As I've said, we found that many of the journals are good. Doesn't mean that all of them are good. If a lot of people are saying that there's problems there might be. But at this point, we don't see them. And again, we believe you should do this at a individual journal level and not assume that everything done by some of these publishers must be considered a blanket statement, all of it's predatory. That said, I can imagine that the Malaysian government sees warning signs and says it's probably safer to avoid certain publishers. Fair enough. I think that's different than what we do, which is saying we want the journals of these publishers which do meet the criteria should be able to be on Scopus, right? I think we covered this already, that so journals behavior can change, and journals that were indexed in Scopus 20 years ago might change hands in terms of who manages them. Some journals which were not predatory can become predatory. So we identify the change in behavior and stop indexing it, the forward flow. So in most cases, we keep the older papers in Scopus. Here's a great quote by Peter Brimblecombe. It is clearly important to remove journals that are predatory or adopt poor publishing practices from the Scopus database. It is less clear what to do with earlier content in the database, particularly as it may have arisen in periods when the journal was well managed and represents output from well-conducted research. So I think that is why we don't remove all of the content when a journal is discontinued. I'm going to read through some of the Q&A. If you have any comments, Nicholas, please take it over for me. So Mohammed Abdul asks, as a new researcher and PhD candidate, what and how should I prepare to publish in Scopus? So Scopus covers specific journals, and if you want to publish in Scopus, you need to publish in one of the journals that's covered in Scopus. So I would discuss it with your mentor, so the professor or whoever is your mentor for your PhD. Ask him or her which journals you should be considering to publish in, and then it's pretty easy to see if those journals are in Scopus or not, based on what we explained today. Is the right thing to do self-citation in the upcoming article of mine? Is there any limitations to this? It's kind of off topic. Self-citations, you should only cite yourself if there's an academic reason to do it. So if you're referring to a previous finding of yours or a method that you've employed that was discussed in a previous paper, then it's perfectly valid to cite that. If you're citing yourself just to boost your citations, yeah, don't do that. That's a bad idea. Some journals publish their acceptance rate. What range of acceptance rate is considered for a good journal? I don't know. Nicholas, do you have any idea?
So I would say on average, the acceptance rate for journals in Elsevier, broadly speaking, is anywhere from 20 to 30%. Later, we'll show you a tool that we have called Journal Finder. And when you put in your title and your abstract inside, and you can see, we'll generate for you a list of journals published by Elsevier, and it will indicate the acceptance rate of it. So that's something that you can refer to. But I would say by nature, there is no hard and fast rule for what is considered as a good acceptance rate for a journal. Each journal would have different varying numbers in terms of publications as well as submissions. So it entirely differs. For instance, if you were to publish in a very, very famous journal such as Cell or Lancet, you can be pretty sure that the acceptance rate would not be very high, but this is just entirely purely the nature and the prestige of the journal in which you are submitting to.
So conclusion is, while we do our best and there are authorities out there also trying to do their best, people come to different conclusions sometimes as to which journal is predatory or not. So conclusion from that is that researchers themselves must practice due diligence. So it's up to you to kind of understand what, the journal that you're submitting your article to, and check that you're sure or confident that this is the journal that you want to publish in. The fact that a particular journal is published in Scopus or Web of Science, which are both a curated database, is not 100% guarantee that the journal is not predatory. Behavior of journals can change over time, so it takes us time to identify these behaviors and to de-index journals. So you need to also keep an eye out for those same warning signs. So you need to be vigilant of warning signs that a journal might be predatory. And I would base this on individual journals, not necessarily publishers, unless the funding you received prohibits you from publishing with certain publishers. Okay, fair enough. But as mentioned, we do this at a journal level. The consequences are, that's supposed to say serious. So the consequences for choosing a bad journal for good work are significant in terms of there's a monetary cost. So the money that you spent doing the research results in a paper that's published in a predatory journal. So maybe that journal is no longer being indexed in Scopus. There's a reputational cost. So if you publish a lot of papers in predatory journals, people may not respect you as much as if you publish in genuine higher quality journals. So it may also have a negative impact on rankings and research assessments. So if you get an assessment of your performance, your papers are published in predatory journal and not included in Scopus, for example, may have a negative impact on assessment. For the durability of the paper, once the paper is published in a predatory journal, you might not be able to publish it, likely not in a genuine journal, which means what happens to the paper, right? It'd be a real shame. And there's the delisting of journals by indexing services, not only Scopus. Possible legal consequences, possible, right? So it is a serious it's a serious predicament, and I think we want to highlight kind of two themes. Other than just predatory behavior, there's a such thing as journal hijacking and paper brokers. So journal hijacking is when a journal pretends to, like when a predatory journal pretends to be an existing journal, which is not predatory, right? So it means that they might hijack the website, or they might create a website which kind of copies the name and ISSN of an existing journal, hoping that you will accidentally, believe that they are the genuine journal and publish there. So, for example, here we see the journal Transylvanian Review, and here you see another journal, Transylvanian Review, and you wonder which one is the correct one. Or here we see this journal, Research on how do you pronounce that, Nicholas?
Lepidoptera.
Okay. And yeah, here you see that this journal ceased to exist in 2017, but today there's still a website there accepting submissions and claiming that the journal is in Scopus. So yeah, you don't fall for it, right? You need to check the Scopus source list and see, hey, this journal stopped in 2017. It doesn't exist anymore. This website's fake. Here was one that I think hit a lot of people in Southeast Asia, Solid State Technology. It's a journal that stopped publishing in 2019. But yeah, boom, there was a website saying Solid State Technology. It had like a big Scopus sticker there saying, oh, we're indexed in Scopus. It said that they were double-blind peer review, and anyway, it was fake, and that's common. So you need to check that the people that you're dealing with, the website that you're dealing with, is genuine, that they are who they say they are, and that it's not an imposter, so to say. The other one is paper brokers. These are groups of people, a company. It comes across like an entity. Usually it's got like a name like IJRDO. And they make promises often to universities, sometimes to researchers, saying, we can work with you. I will charge you a fee, a certain amount of money. And if you pay me this fee, I will help to get you published in journals that are in Scopus. And they often have a list of journals saying that they can guarantee that you will get accepted into these journals. This is, of course, a promise they can't make. And you should not ever trust these brokers that are making such promises. We've seen it in Malaysia quite often. We've seen it with 123MI in Russia. But so if you look at IJRDO, it says that a wide range of journals, some of our Scopus journals are as follows, and it had like, and here it says a time to publication, Scopus indexed, and they have an email address that says scopus@aphjournal.com. So it makes it seem like somehow they're affiliated to Scopus. We have nothing to do with these people. They cannot make these promises. So if any group of people, even if they have a nice website and they seem friendly enough, make a promise of, if you pay us 1,000 ringgit, then I'll guarantee that you get 3 papers published in journals that are in Scopus. Don't believe them. These are promises they can't make. They're just trying to make money off of you, and you're going to get yourself into trouble. So become your own person and understand yourself which journals are journals that you should be publishing in. Discuss it with your mentor, discuss it with your librarian, and try to aim higher. Don't go for the bottom, whatever is easiest, right? Whoever is promising you, making promises to you, often if it's too good to be true, it's not true, right? If it seems too good to be true, it's not true. So just be careful. Websites can have warning signs. So a lot of the predatory journals have vague, it's hard to see who's on the editorial board, right? A good journal has a strong editorial board. These are prominent researchers who have their name on the journal. They are responsible for the journal, right? If the journal has predatory practices, this would impact the reputation of these researchers. So no prominent responsible researcher is going to be on the board of a journal that is blatantly ripping people off, right? So editorial board is really important. If it's hard to find who are the editors, that's already a warning sign. If it brags that they are site score, quartile 2, and they've got like a blinking light saying that they're in Scopus and Web of Science, that's also, if they get guarantees, we can peer review you in 1 week, guaranteed, that super big warning sign. But any other ones that you think you come across, Nick?
I think the timing of the APC fees, I think when people ask you to pay for money upfront, that's a very big warning sign for me as well, because at the end of the day, your article still has to be of a certain standard. It has to go through the peer review process. It has to be accepted. And then that's only when they should ask you for the article processing charge fee as well. That's one of the big warning signs for me.
That's a really good point. Yeah, just because a journal is open access doesn't mean you pay. It doesn't mean that the article is automatically accepted. It has to go through peer review. Only if it makes it through peer review, you should be paying at that point. Is that right?
That is correct.
But some of these journals are saying you got to pay us now before the peer review.
Very
All
sus.
right. Yeah. Red flag, red flag. I'm worried. So please do your due diligence. Unfortunately, the internet today is kind of like walking through a city at night, right? If you're in a big city, people walking up to you may not always be who they say that they are. If you have a man in trench coat asking you if you want to buy a watch, it's a Rolex, it costs only 20 ringgit. There's reason to believe that this person is not who they say they are, and that probably what they're selling is not what they say that it is. So the internet is a bit the same that way, right? There's a lot of stuff that has a nice website. It says that it's a genuine journal. All you have to do is pay this money and we guarantee that you're going to get into this journal and it's in Scopus and so forth. Consider they might not be what they're pretending to be. And that's just a fact of life. We have to deal with it. The higher you aim, I think that you'll come across this less, right? So as we aim higher, but the brand of a journal, the editorial board, the legacy, the history of a journal is super important, right? I think common red flags are the website deviation from best editorial practices. So yes, we want we want you to pay up front. We guarantee that you'll be accepted. Lack of transparency. You don't know who the editorial board is. You don't understand how the fees are. It's kind of hard to figure out what's going on. And most of all, the aggressive, indiscriminate solicitation, repeated emails, telling you your work is great. We guarantee you should get into our journal. It's going to be perfect place for you to publish. A real journal is incredibly selective. It should be difficult to publish in a journal, right? Proper peer reviewed journal. So remember the warning signs. Nicholas, you know more about this thing than I do. So
sure thing. So Think, Check, and Submit is a cross-industry initiative led by representatives across different publishers as well and organizations. So this is one of the very good example on how multiple publishers and parties, we all know predatory publishing is a very big point of concern, but it's actually a very good point for you to run through, right? Because these are guidelines for you to assess a journal before you actually submit your article in. So we talk about quite thoroughly about how predatory publishers actually prey on you as an author. So maybe you can create yourself, first and foremost, a checklist, right? You need to think, you need to check before you submit, right? Create a checklist first and ask yourself, if the journal is the right fit for your work, check the aims and scope of the journal, check the homepage of the journal. You need to see if your topic matches the journal's scope. You can go to a journal and you can see the most recent articles and see whether or not your work corresponds or correlates with regards to that. You need to also ask yourself if the journal publishes the type of article that you're looking to publish, like a review article. You need to ask yourself, and it's very easy, and this is a hard question, right? Is there a reasonable chance of acceptance? Because everyone's gauge will be different. Some people are very confident about themselves. Some would not be as confident about themselves. But I would say the most important thing for you here is to be very, very critical, and you need to be very realistic whether or not your work is of a certain quality enough to be accepted. But I will also say back yourself. You need to believe in yourself, and you need to be very, very critical and to understand whether or not the work is good enough. Also, very crucially, you want to know whether or not this journal is familiar within your research community. Because at the end of the day, it's not just only about publishing, it's also about getting the citations that your work deserves. You want your work to be read by the communities that will read your work and will also cite it. You need to also check whether or not the journal is being indexed by the relevant database like PubMed, like Scopus, like Web of Science. Go and do read through the journal. You need to ascertain whether or not the journal is of a good enough quality, whether or not you can trust it, right? So these guidelines really apply to readers looking for means to identify trusted sources, but this is quite a useful checklist. I would encourage you to do so as well.
Okay, so the source title list, I explained already a few times where to get it. I see online a couple of people were still asking. So again, the best place to find out the status of a journal in Scopus, right? So if you go to www.scopus.com, this is a landing page. If you go here to sources, here is an option to download the source title list. This is updated once a month, and it will show you the status of every journal and a list of all of the discontinued journals, indicating what the last year volume, issue, and page range is in Scopus. That's the best place for you to look. I think someone asked, can we email Scopus asking about a particular title? You can't, because I mean, Nicholas and I also were explaining all of the warning signs and so forth. Ultimately, the end responsible people for determining which journals are included or deselected in Scopus are the CSAB. The results of that process are reflected in this title list, which is updated once a month. In the meantime, if you see serious red flags, you can report it to us. So if you think a journal that's in Scopus is predatory and you have some evidence, feel free to forward it to us. We will share it with the Scopus team, and maybe that journal will be reevaluated. But you have to realize that in life, sometimes you have to rely on your own instinct, that if you think that there's reason to think that a journal that is indexed in Scopus, maybe it's not on any blacklist, you think it doesn't feel right, then don't do it. I think the higher you go up in quality, right? So if you're not focusing on Q4 journals, if you're focusing on higher quality journals, the risk becomes less, right? So in aiming higher, it's harder to get into the journal, and the risk that the journal is predatory is much lower. But we understand that there is pressure on a lot of people to publish, and that it's not easy. So it's tempting to find the journal that's easiest. But I would say try to aim a little bit higher, challenge yourself, and go for a journal that's truly selective and that you have no concerns about the status of the journal. I think that'd be ultimately better for your career than aiming as low as possible, even though maybe that will boost the speed at which you publish and the volume of publications. So Q&A, we have answered all the questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to go through the chat, see if there's anything else there. All right, I think we covered everything. Any last questions before we go on? Okay, hi, Mr. Alexander. I was interested when you mentioned paper brokers. My apologies. Is that difficult for article speak accepted by Scopus that some authors use the services of paper brokers as a shortcut? Can you give advice on the best way for articles to be accepted in
Sander? I think Sander's internet might have cut off for a bit. Let me drop him a message. Yeah, I'm really sorry, but I think Sander's internet dropped off for a quick bit. So in the meantime, I think what I will do is I'll try and answer some of the questions. Hey, Sander, you're back.
I'm back.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so it's still stalling a bit. So that was on my end. So I was trying to answer the question on how do you publish in a journal? What's the advised way to do it, if not through a paper broker, is to do it to the individual journal. So maybe come with a short list of journals that you think are ones that match your field, and go to the journal webpage and look at the author guidelines and look at the aims and scope of the journal. Become really research your journal, right? I mean, there's no reason to expect other people to do that. And Nicholas, maybe you can show Journal Finder.
Yeah, be very glad to do so. Give me a quick second.
It's the first time in many years that my internet died during a webinar.
There's a first for everyone. The other day I was in Malaysia and my internet was completely wonky, as you probably remembered. So I think it's actually quite cool. So can you see my screen by any chance?
Yeah.
Great. So Journal Finder for Elsevier is actually very easy and straightforward. If you type Journal Finder Elsevier on Google, you should be able to click on the first link that you see. And this is essentially journalfinder.elsevier.com. So I think it's really cool. We've changed the interface a little. Once again, we encourage you to actually log in or create an account. When you create an account, you'll be able to actually see a list of journals that you may have shortlisted, right? Sign into it and then start using it. It's actually quite cool. It uses what we call the Elsevier fingerprint engine. There are two ways for you to do so. You can either match your abstract, right? And what it does is that it uses a machine learning algorithm to create a list of recommended journals for you to publish your research in. So when you click on Find Journals, it will create a profile of the research based on your abstract and the title, and then it's compared with profiles of previously published paper for all journals that are indexed within Scopus. And this is basically mostly for Elsevier journals only. So we used to have basically examples for you to type in your abstract when you match it in, or you can alternatively search for your keywords, aims and scope, and journal title. So maybe I'm looking for material science, right? That's something which I'm looking for. And then I can click on Find Journals. And then you can find over here how you can edit your search accordingly. You can choose to, you can basically switch your options if you want to look for journals that offer Go Open access, or if you don't want to pay, you can select journals with subscription. You can filter the timing for site score, for the first decision, for the impact factor, and the total time for publication. And I think this is actually pretty cool because under here, when you select all this information, you can find out more about computational material science. We can see over here the site score, the impact factor, very usefully, the acceptance rate of the journal, the time to the first decision, and the time to the publication, right? You can see the recent articles. This is what I mentioned earlier, and you can take a look at the journal scope under the aims and scope of the journal itself. And crucially, it gives you a guide for authors so that you know what you have to do so that you can encourage and to reduce the chances of you being rejected if you adhere to the stipulations correctly as well. So I think this is actually pretty cool. It's quite useful. It's free to use. I highly encourage you to do so. And I think it gives you a lot of information to publish safely in a good enough quality journal. So yeah, please do feel free, and then you can save it or you can submit the paper. We try to do our best to make it as easy for you to do so, and I'll encourage you to use it. It's free to use.
Also, I think to build on that, if I'm looking in Scopus and I want to find journals related to a particular field, right? So I can look in my fields.
I think you went past it.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So there we go. Developmental and educational psychology, right? So I can find all the journals that are there. Now, let's say I find contemporary educational psychology, and I think that might be an interesting journal. You can see it's an Elsevier journal. Sometimes you can link to the homepage of the journal from Scopus, but if you, it's not always there, the link. If not, just search on Google. But if it's there, I think for any given journal that you're interested in, go and understand the journal. You know, what's the aims and scope of the journal? What are they focused on? Does this match what I'm doing? Who are the editors, right? Who are these people? Are these respected people in the field? Do I have every reason to believe that these are respected people in the field? At least here, it's very clear who they are. Guide for authors. So what is their guide for you as an author, and what are they expecting from you? Usually there's even like a document you can download that gives you a lot of information. You don't need a paper broker to do this. I think you can come up with a short list of journals that you think are interesting, that meet your field, talk to your mentor, shortlist some of them, and then for any given manuscript, you might want to look at which one of those journals fit the particular manuscript, and come up with a curated list of journals that you think are matching in terms of theme, that you have a good chance of acceptance, but that you don't see warning signs that it could be any quality problem or predatory publishing and so forth, right? And that would be my suggested approach. So we're exactly at the end of the webinar, so I'm going to jump to the last part, which is the certificate. I'm wrestling with my screen as usual. Certificates, you can get your certificate via the below links or using the QR code here. If you use the QR code, you will be asked to fill in a short survey that asks you, it's about 2 minutes. It will ask you about our performance as consultants, so please be kind. We hope that today's session was helpful. Once you've done the survey, you can get the certificate using the workshop code BZXTXQ. If you forget all of this, you will receive an email 24 hours from now with a link. You can download these slides so that you can get this information again. Otherwise, take a quick picture of your screen now so that you can get your certificate if that's important to you. Oh, okay. That was quite an intense topic to cover, so we hope it's helpful. I know it's a bit of a complex topic, and thanks, Nicholas, for doing this together all these years. And any last words before we say goodbye?
I've copy and pasted the survey and the certificates and the workshop code in the chat, so everyone can just copy and paste it and refer it at their own convenience. Sander, it's been an absolute pleasure doing this series with you. I will miss it.
All right, so I'll see you all around. Take care. I think it's almost lunchtime, so with that, have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.